Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. Hopefully, Lizz Nolasco and I, mostly me, have gotten all the weirdness out of our systems with our pre-mic chat, and now we're ready to go. Hi, Liz.
Hello.
And when I say pre-mic weirdness, I mean Heather listing off all her current ailments and thinking that Liz had shifted her body when she turned her camera sideways.
I am very
Or
flexible. It's an
somehow
easy mistake to
projected
make.
off the wall. Yeah. Oh man, well, this is going to be fun. We're doing a series. So Liz and I already did an episode about, I almost said about Liz, about Lilian Katz. And then Liz made a funny joke suggestion that we do a series and call it Katz Ladies. So that's what we're doing. Even though Mike's going to be on one of them, but we decided he could be an honorary lady. Right? Yeah. So Liz and I are going to talk about an essay, an article, I don't know exactly, a chapter that Lilian Katz wrote, I think in 1993, it looked like.
The book is from 95, but the
Right,
chapter
yeah.
was likely from earlier. I'm not sure if it was published
Yeah, there's
elsewhere.
a footnote, yeah, that it's originally from 1993. But anyway, the book is called Talks with Teachers of Young Children, a collection. And I just have to get, for the video version, this lovely 90s illustrated cover on there. Can't really get the nuance of all the pastels in there with my bright office. But the chapter is called The Distinction Between Self-Esteem and Narcissism, Implications for Practice, which sounds like a lot.
I think it's also so significant, like the year that this was written. So being from 93, I feel like narcissism is used a lot more now in
Yeah.
regular conversation. It's possible
Yeah.
I'm on the internet too much, but I feel like narcissistic has kind of become the new descriptor for anybody I don't like.
Yes, for
And
sure.
I think her definition here that we can get to shortly is an important jumping off point.
Right. Yeah. So I think I'll do the quote and then maybe we should just do, never mind. We'll get to the definitions as it comes up, sort of naturally. But the quote we're gonna start with is, she says, a central argument of this essay. Oh, it's an essay. I should have remembered. She already told me what to call it. A central argument of this essay is that a characteristic of current early childhood education practices, exemplified by a poster that we'll describe here in a minute, provides environments for young children that are at best unreal and at worst phony rather than authentic, fanciful rather than imaginative, and more amusing and entertaining than interesting and intellectually challenging. Commendable as it is for children to have high self-esteem, many of the practices advocated in the service of this goal may inadvertently develop narcissism in the form of excessive preoccupation with oneself, instead of a deep and meaningful sense of self-confidence and self-worth. So she starts the essay by talking about a poster she saw in a school. It was like a Bugs Bunny kind of character that said, "Do yourself a favor," with the word yourself underlined, compliment someone today. And it's hard to spread sunshine without spilling a little on yourself. So that was her starting point for thinking about, this isn't about, that poster's not about a child developing, kind of healthy self-image or self-esteem. The poster is about performing,
Using others for your own
using others for your own
gratification.
good feeling. Yeah. And sort of performing kindness without authentic kindness, maybe, because it's ultimately benefiting you, you're not doing it to benefit the person you complimented, right? So I mean, I did have a thought about that initially, that as an adult, it does keep me in a different mindset, and it does impact me positively to say kind things or to acknowledge something about somebody else. But I'm not doing that for my self-esteem, right? I'm just doing it because I want to be
Right. There's a
part of this
difference
community
between,
where we uplift each other.
right, building relationships for the sake of relationships
Yeah.
or others
Yeah.
versus I'm the
Yeah.
person who always gives compliments and spreads sunshine. They're very different.
Yeah. Yeah. As I was reading this, and I do this whenever I read Lilian Katz and others that I first read in the 90s that I'm now rereading. Um, and there's some of the stuff in this chapter is dated, but there's also so much that hasn't changed. And so I was trying to think about how, as a professor, I don't use the word self-esteem really. I might talk about identity development or self-efficacy or, um, even sort of, I might say self-image, but I don't really use the word self-esteem much.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out if I had used it and when. And I know that when I was in the classroom, I would avoid all the books that had self-esteem at the title or were explicitly aimed at teaching self-esteem. And I'm trying to
Yeah.
think, I feel like I've used self-confidence before,
Yeah.
relating to specific children who don't necessarily feel like they have much of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think as a general classroom goal, it was ever, certainly it wasn't, self-esteem definitely wasn't stated. I do think confidence might have been,
Mm-hmm.
building confidence was likely
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
part of my goals for the kids I was working with.
Yeah, and I definitely have gotten annoyed at whether it's someone in person or someone on social media complaining that we're so worried about kids' self-esteem that we're turning them all into self-centered narcissists or whatever. And I have this initial reaction of no, their, you know, um, ideas about themselves are important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I never went deeper like Katz is doing here, where she's really drawing a distinction between things that um, just sort of teach children to focus only on themselves or
Right.
train them, condition them, socialize them, whatever, to think only about themselves and to insist that they are special. This is another argument I had over the weekend about special kids, but um, and things that just truly authentically support that identity development.
Right. And the idea of what we focus on and how children construct that self-image versus the idea that you can just pour self-esteem onto a child.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, she at one point she says you can't teach a feeling. You can't through direct instruction.
right.
Um, and she talks a lot about those all about me themes that I've definitely done, as a teacher in the past, and the I am special because kinds of activities that I know are still really prevalent. Uh,
Right.
but she also talks then about the themes that come up in children's answers about that. And, if um I can't remember what she said, like if I'm special, nobody's special or something
Oh,
like
yeah, she'd have a line like that. Yeah, I loved
if
the
everyone
way
is
she,
special, nobody is special, is what she said.
mhm,
Yeah.
right. And the way she talked about the activities being putting the child in the role of consumer rather than creator or
Yeah.
producer or investigator.
Yeah.
Just the idea that I'm special because of what I consume and what I enjoy versus what I am and think and bring to the world.
Yeah, right. So I want to be specific with that. She says each child had produced a little booklet called All About Me, on which the child had provided information about him or herself. Stuff like what I like to eat, what I like to watch on TV, what I want for a present, where I want to go on vacation. She says on each page, the child's attention was directed towards his or her inner gratifications, um, putting the child in the role of consumer, the consumer of food, entertainment, gifts, and recreation. nothing was included that put the child in the role of producer, investigator, initiator, outreacher, explorer, experimenter, wonderer, problem solver. And that's such a, in those like 2 sentences or whatever, I think that it really encapsulates the distinction between
Yes.
self-esteem and narcissism. Like, are we trying to just go through the motions and play a game where something looks obviously like it would be encouraging to a child? Or are we kind of deeply understanding how that kind of confidence and identity development and sort of idea about themselves as being an effective, interesting person? Are
I
we
think there's
really thinking
also,
about that and deciding what to do next?
right. I think there's also this element of excessive praise, which I think is what a lot of the critics of the specialness
Yeah,
are getting at, right?
yeah,
You become accustomed to what you experience.
yeah.
And once that effusive and false praise drops off after kindergarten, first grade, whatever, all of a sudden you have this crisis of, wait, but no one's told me I'm special this week. What's happening?
Yeah. I thought about, as I was reading this, a 2-year-old that I worked with several years ago. And during my, I was a brand new teacher, and the director was giving me a tour and introducing me to the children, and pointed at this 2-year-old girl and said, she's like another little teacher. She's like a little mother. She's just good at everything. And such a whatever. But when I really watched her, she was just sort of clandestine in her meanness to other people. Like, you could see her doing all these unkind things. I mean, unkind for a 2-year-old, what does that mean? But anyway, you could see that she had just sort of already learned to be sort of subversive, and to be
And what an interesting
presenting,
interpretation that was maternal and
yeah,
teacherly
and presenting that, when the adults were clearly watching. And at one point, I don't remember what happened, but she was, corrected, redirected, stopped, or whatever.
Mhm.
And she just gritted her teeth and yelled, "I'm a good girl." Like, she was
Oh,
rejecting any of
yeah.
that, just sort of part of being
Right.
in group life,
And Katz talks about that too, right? How young children really can't be expected to have a consistent sense of self-esteem in that way, right?
Right.
They need to be able to respond to adults and peers and everybody else's feedback of
Yeah.
who they are to create that impression of them. And so they start with that attachment and the warmth, right? But then they mature into a person who is hopefully able to take various forms of feedback and incorporate them into
Yeah.
one sense of self without becoming delusional, right?
Yeah.
Being able to accept those things without being either delusional or so thoroughly thrown off by the slightest bit of criticism that it
Yeah.
just wrecks everything.
Yeah. When she's talking about the developmental considerations to bring into this question or this comparison, she says a significant aspect of the development and maintenance of self-esteem must address how individuals cope with negative feedback. And she talks about if individuals avoid rather than cope with negative feedback, they have to devote a lot of effort to gain approval by impression management. And I think that's what I was kind of trying to remember when I was talking about the 2-year-old a minute ago. But it's interesting when I think there's 2 things that came to mind a lot as I read this. One is just the resistance of adults who work with children to just that argument, that mismatch I was talking about a minute ago, where they would say self-esteem is damaging, they're going to be narcissists, and I would recoil. And I think it's just because it's without digging deeper, it's such a blanket denial of a child's humanity, right? To not understand
Mm-hmm.
that we are and can and should be thinking about what the impact of their time with us has on their ideas about themselves. So this weekend I was on Facebook, and there's a page I follow called the Badass Teachers Association or something like that. And they shared that, you remember a couple years ago, it was really popular, that handle with care, little kids
Oh yeah.
ticket kind of thing that the teachers would give to families. Like if you're,
Don't give anybody the benefit of the doubt. Make them tell you that something is going on in their life.
well, exactly. Yeah. It's like that, if your child has a rough day, just
Mhm.
tell me handle with care, whatever, and we'll know they need a little extra time or patience or help or whatever, which is cute, whatever. It's probably not the worst thing. But yeah, my reaction is, so what are we doing on the days we don't get the handle with care
Right.
ticket or whatever from them? And somebody in the comments said, I mean, there were commenters saying this kind of what we just kind of said, but this particular person said, it's a nice idea. I just think that it will be abused by entitled parents. And so I said, oh, yeah, how dare they trick us into giving their children time and care and patience? What a racket. And she said, oh, clearly you're one of those parents who thinks their child is special. And I just kind of ended it there. But like that to me is that comes to me as a dislike of children, right? That or dislike of parents, or just not being willing to think about the humanity. Um, but I didn't go deeper into it to see how she felt about it. But I had that on my mind while I was reading this. But also all the punished by rewards stuff. Uh,
Right.
all the times that I've tried to or talked to woo, either teachers that I've worked with or the students I have now, about being more authentic and more specific with feedback and not relying on nice job, good job, oh, you're so pretty, oh, you're such a good listener or whatever. And they
Hmm.
feel like that sounds so heartless for me to say.
Right. I think there's such a, not a balance to be struck exactly, but I think so much of this comes from conflicting definitions, right? The idea of, so I'm thinking about this, the teacher gave you pushback on the parents who would take advantage of this, right? I think there, I think there's such a spectrum of definitions
Yeah,
for patience and care. And I think that this is not controversial, like not allowing children the self-efficacy, and there's harm in coddling children,
yeah,
right? Not letting them experience being their own protagonist.
yeah,
And I think there's a perfectly reasonable argument to be made that yes, children should be able to take on these emotional challenges within their zone of proximal development with the support of caring adults.
right.
But we can't just throw them tools. We can't just say, oh, yeah, your mom and dad had a huge argument last night. You didn't sleep at all. And now you're here in my classroom and you're going to sit down and listen to this
Yeah,
story and not cry, you
yeah,
know?
yeah,
um, and there's such a broad interpretation of, can we let children express or experience frustration or sadness or anger? And that goes all the way to, I will make children express sadness and
mhm,
frustration and anger,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Well,
So I think it's just so individual that way.
yeah, definitely. She writes, while such children may not be harmed by exercises that tell them they are special or by constant praise and flattery, the argument here is that they are more likely to achieve real self-esteem from experiences that provide meaningful challenge and opportunities for real effort. So I mean, I think there I might push back on there's no harm that can be caused from the excessive um praise
Mhm.
and flattery. It's not the worst thing that I
Right.
seen happening in early childhood classrooms with people. But so I want to jump to the actual definitions that she gives us of self-esteem, since you just sort of led us into talking about the spectrum.
She does give a really quick definition of narcissism right at the beginning of the article, where she says,
Yeah,
well, actually, both. Self-esteem refers to feelings derived from evaluations of the self, and narcissism is a preoccupation with oneself
yeah,
and how one is seen by others.
yeah,
But she does elaborate on both those later in the article, but those were good jumping off points.
that idea of excessive preoccupation with oneself, instead of a deep and meaningful sense of self-confidence and so forth, I think um also points to, or at least makes me think about, do the people working with the young children have time to be thoughtful and intentional? Do
Mm-hmm.
they have the freedom to do that, or are they given an all about me theme that they have to do? Do they have the developmental knowledge or experience to think about the difference between a preoccupation with self and a deep and meaningful sense of self-confidence and self-worth? And I think that's one of the big issues here, is that the answer to a lot of those questions is often no, they haven't been given,
Right.
they haven't had the opportunity, or they don't see the importance of going any deeper than, oh, but the kids love to tell us where they went for vacation
Right.
or what food they like.
And because, most teachers are only with kids for a year or
Yeah,
so, they don't get to see that trajectory, that development, that, they see the kids
yeah,
where they are at the beginning of the year and the end of the year.
right.
And maybe there is like, man, I've told these kids they're special all year and look how happy they are at the end of the year compared to the beginning, right? But
Yeah,
you don't get that meaningful reflection or the meaningful time with the children to really see. And it's just part of the relationship, right? You don't get the whole picture ever.
right. Yeah, yeah. There's another chapter in the book called Education or Excitement, that I thought about too as you were just talking. So we may have to add that to our list of Katz Ladies episodes to do. It's not on the list right now, but talking about that, are we just sort of entertaining, or are we really thinking deeply
Mhm.
about what really does build those things we're trying to build?
Right. I
Um,
think she's got such an incredible reflection, right? But just such incredible insight into the way um, the way children develop and the way teachers can support them
uh-huh.
and should support
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
That's not just surface level. It just goes so much deeper.
Yeah, in the developmental considerations section, she says for very young children, self-esteem is probably best characterized as deep feelings of being loved, accepted, and valued by significant others, rather than as feelings derived from evaluating themselves against some external criteria.
Mhm.
Um, so it's interesting to me, like when I hear that, just that initial, oh, you're probably one of those people who thinks your child is special or whatever. um I mean, definitely I was an obnoxious parent and still am, even though they're grown-ups. um but that was, that's what that was how I expect my children would be
Right.
experiencing their life, with adults who
Well,
have chosen to work with young children.
it goes to Bronfenbrenner too, right? Every child needs an adult who's absolutely crazy about them, and
Yeah, yeah. And resilience, the current resilience conversation. I don't know what kinds of trauma and resilience conversations were happening in 1993. I would guess not very many. Um,
mhm.
but that's a piece of it too. It's not just that we're trying to make the child feel good about themselves and teach them that they're special and there's no one like them. For me, when we talk about self-esteem or self anything with young children, it's it's about acceptance. Do you really know me? Do you really like at least some things about me? And if you can't find it, are you willing to work hard to find something that you like about me? And when we are focusing on what kinds of things they consume, or whether or not they have done what we wanted them to do, it's really easy to slip in, for some children to slip through that and just get constant messages that nothing you do here is right or good, and you're really sort of an inconvenience. And I think
Yeah.
that child, if our, whatever our goals are, if our goals are just healthy human development, or our goal is school success or whatever, that kind of feeling, that child's continued experience of not being accepted or known or seen, let alone loved, is not going to build up what the child needs to do it, whatever, whichever goal it is. You know what I mean?
Right. And just identifying, if you're in this field, you are in fact a significant other of this child.
Yeah.
Just by
Right.
your existence in their life, you are significant.
Yeah. And to go back to resilience, we know that one of the factors for a child to be resilient is these good, strong, loving, warm relationships with as many adults as we can get to them. And that
Right.
includes us,
Right. All of the allo parents and
the
the
allo
community at
parents.
large.
Love it.
Um,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry. My next highlight, which is very close by, I looked at the relationship between self-esteem at 5 and 6 years old and the quality of mother-child attachment. And of
Yeah,
course, it's mother-child. Of course, we don't look at anybody else. But
right. Liz 93.
and the study itself was at 98, so I
Yeah.
guess it can be forgiven. But
80.
oh, sorry, did I say 98? 88,
Yeah.
yes. She was also a time traveler. I don't know if you know this about Lilian Katz. But this idea of requiring that warm attachment, and again, just how people interpret what that looks like, right? I think there is a prevailing cultural idea right now that attachment kind of means not disagreeing, right? Not setting boundaries, not setting limits.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
it's certainly not everybody, but I think there's a difficult relationship that's being pushed by varying sources on how to work with, collaborate with, exist with young children, where on one hand, you have these intense, stop them right when they, step a toe out of line. And then there's they're children, they can't possibly be expected to know these things. And
Yeah.
it's true, but there's this abdication of responsibility that again is harmful in a way
Yeah.
that, this highly maturationist versus social constructivist theory of working with children.
Yeah.
But the idea of that attachment relationship from birth being warm and accepting and nurturing is crucial. And again, defining what warm, accepting, nurturing look like, and how it's not coddling, and how it is being that safe landing space for the children.
Yeah. Yeah. And being the guardrail when they need a guardrail.
Yes.
Right. Like I think about, I can't remember where it's not anything earth shattering, but I remember when I read it first, I was like, oh yeah. Because I have a fear of bridges, driving over bridges. So someone many, many, many years ago suggested that, boundaries with children or whatever is like having a guardrail on the bridge. You've never driven into the guardrail probably, but you feel a lot better knowing it's there when you drive over the bridge.
I want to say that was an old Janet Lansbury article because I
It
remember
does,
reading
yeah.
that as well.
Or Janet Gonzalez Mena.
Oh, maybe.
Maybe for me, but I mean, they're both really, in tune with Magda Gerber, so it could be Magda.
Right.
But what I loved about that section, and that this study was done by somebody named Cassidy, last name Cassidy. Cassidy points out that very young children have few means of learning about themselves other than through experience with attachment figures.
Right. Right. And all they can rely on is the way those attachment figures respond to them.
Right. And I mean, that's the repeated message. That's how we it's just like being, immersed among people speaking the language of your culture. That's how you learn the language. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily um, during the first 5 years, during the first few years for sure, um, sitting down and teaching language intentionally,
Right.
or teaching how to talk. Modeling, sure, and offering lots of rich vocabulary, sure, you can impact it that way. But it's the immersion in it that sends the brain the stuff it needs to wire
Mhm.
up and start understanding and speaking or communicating. I think it's the same here when we're talking about how they learn about themselves, how they get that identity information, uh,
Right.
just by the people around them and the experiences they have and the messages they receive.
Right. And hopefully those adults have the insight and foresight to be able to
Yeah,
to maintain that composure, um, maintain the emotional safety for the child, right?
right.
Maintain that. Uh, sorry, I know searching for the word I'm
Yeah,
looking for is really excellent content. Uh,
yeah,
but just being able to be that secure base for the child, being able to provide the comfort and the warmth and the understanding and
yeah.
the many, many, many things that children need, and also the ability to go back to said child and go, I was wrong. I was really mad earlier, and I had no reason to be really mad earlier.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what I was going to add to your list, was providing the repair when there are
Yeah.
ruptures, sort of taking the initiative and modeling the repair of
Mhm.
the relationship or the interaction, um, or being the one who can kind of explicitly say, uh, uh, you took that risk, or this thing happened and it wasn't what you wanted, but it's still safe to be here with me. You know what I mean? Or it hasn't
Yeah.
changed fundamentally how I'm going to interact or respond to you, um, is an important piece
And I
of
think it's one that
conversation.
is scary for a lot of adults to apologize to children when we're the
Yeah,
ones who've had an
right,
outburst, right?
right,
Hopefully it doesn't happen often, but it's an intense job and we all have limits, right?
for sure. Yeah. So you said something that might fit here, um, before we were recording, about sort of bringing Eric Erickson stages into the conversation.
Oh, yeah. So just as I was reading this, I kept coming back to The Hill That I Will One Day Die On, which everyone I've ever worked with has heard me preach about. But everyone who is familiar with Erickson stages is familiar with autonomy versus shame and doubt. And there's this prevailing ideology that, like, obviously we're going, well, all of Erickson stage theory, obviously we're going for column one. We don't want column two.
Uh-huh.
Except that's not really what we want. We want appropriate shame and doubt, because shame and doubt are teaching emotions, right?
Right,
Those are, you don't want a child or adult or anybody to be overwhelmed with shame and doubt all the time.
right.
But those are necessary conditions for human flourishing and growth.
Yeah.
And so this idea of self-esteem through authentic interactions with others and the environment just felt very similar, in that we need children, and she outright says it, right? We already talked about this a little bit, how children need to be able to handle negative responses
Uh-huh.
and learn how to pick themselves back up and like assimilate that feedback,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think that fits in with um conversation about mental health in early childhood. It's not
Mhm.
that they never experience shame or doubt, it's that they learn that they have some self-efficacy they can impact. If you've done something that you feel ashamed about, what can you do? How can you come back?
Right.
You learn from it. And in the early years, not in like a lecture-y way, of course, we're not going to give them a PowerPoint presentation on how their playground decision was something we don't want to see again, if they are tackling
Right.
people out on the playground or whatever. But we can be that kind of voice of realism. Here are the things that happened because we had to we had injuries we had to take care of, or so and so cried when you pushed them down onto the sidewalk because it hurt. We're not doing it in such a way that they're going to switch immediately into fight or flight or freeze or fawn, but we can be that guardrail, and send the message that even though you did this thing, we're still good. Our relationship is still good. I still am gonna be that accepting adult presence that you need. But there's still some use that comes from them having felt the shame or felt the
Right. And
like,
that's
we don't need to have a list of things to do to make a child feel ashamed.
yes, exactly.
You know, but we can acknowledge the possibility when it's there.
Right. And that's kind of what I was saying earlier about the adult, making the child feel sad or angry or
Right,
whatever, right? It's our job to determine when they're exhibiting appropriate shame, right?
right. Yeah,
We don't add to the shame.
right. Yeah,
We help them experience it and,
yeah.
learn
Yeah,
from it.
we shouldn't. I mean, I think we often do add to shame, but we
Well, okay,
should.
yes, you're right. But
Globally,
ideally,
yes.
our goal is not to add to the shame.
Yeah, yeah. I use um especially the first 3 stages of Erickson a lot. And I did in my teaching, and I did, a semester or so ago, have to really give myself a little critical thinking and make sure I was also being explicit that it's not, that the bad thing in the bad category isn't something
Right,
will never happen if we do our jobs right. Just that shouldn't be where the child lands and stays, uh,
right.
in that. And it's something that can help us make decisions about how we're reacting to things. But it's always interesting.
And I think it's so important to keep it. I mean, I feel like particularly autonomy versus shame and doubt is the first time you're going to see the existence of shame. You're not going to see shame on the face of an infant, right?
Right. Yeah.
It just that they're not capable of it, and
Mhm.
then all of a sudden they are, and oh, this feels bad.
Right. This is new.
Yeah,
What do I do with this? Yeah.
but letting them work through it, supporting them and working through it versus leaving them to it
Mhm.
or talking over it, right? Because
Yeah.
uh, rather than patching over it instead of working through it, right?
Yeah. Do you want to, we kind of did a little definition of the narcissism side of it. Do we need to jump into that more explicitly, do you think, here?
Maybe. Do you have
Yeah.
a different definition highlighted? I want to say I only highlighted the first one because it was just like
Yeah, I
a
mean,
good
I'm just looking at,
start.
I mean, there's one that is just really, so she says, according to Lowen, 1985, narcissism refers to a syndrome characterized by exaggerated investment in one's own image versus one's true self, and in how one appears versus how one actually feels.
Mhm.
Um,
I think this is so
dispositions
tricky
often
because
mentioned. Oh, go ahead.
oh no, I was just saying I think this is so tricky because there are absolutely times when we all need to just take it, but that
Mm,
can't be our whole life, right?
right.
You're
Yeah.
going to a job interview, you're going to need to, you know, patch up the cracks a little bit, right? But then
Yeah.
you can't actually live in a way that's entirely performance oriented.
Right, right, right. Yeah. So I think that's maybe tied to one of the threads that goes through this whole essay, the idea of being authentic or being performative. And I
Mhm.
think, like, in a job interview, the performative behavior is authentic because
Right,
that's
that's
what
what the
that
environment calls for.
environment calls for. Um, uh, yeah, I don't know where I was going to go with that. It reminds me of I just read, it's a brand new book called Introducing Bronfenbrenner, that I think it just came out, maybe 23, but it might be 24. And so I was reading a chapter of it to see if I wanted to include it in our child development class. And the author described something that I hadn't thought about in a long time, but demand characteristics that children have, that like stuff about themselves or their behavior either makes it easy for adults to connect with them or makes it hard for adults to connect with them. And that's part of their, their ecosystem then, is adults who are either connected with me or not willing to connect with me. And so it was stuff like, I mean, some of it is race or language, or there's parental characteristics we don't like, so it keeps us from connecting with the child in a way that the child needs from us. But also it's just stuff like the child whose behavior is really hard for us, or the child whose nose is always running, or isn't as cute and pretty as another child. And that just kept sort of rolling through my mind as I was reading. When we think about narcissism being that sort of healthy level of knowing yourself and knowing that, you can cause some effects, and knowing that the people around you will accept you, even when you make mistakes, and narcissism being this exaggerated preoccupation with yourself, and how demand characteristics play into that. Does that make sense? I was unraveling it as I was going, but like, I feel like if we as adults working with children just got into the habit of thinking about demand characteristics and understanding our responses to the children, whether it's a physical response or a mental or verbal response, that could really make a difference in those daily experiences that children are having with us, that ultimately lead to or build to self-esteem or narcissism.
Right. Yeah. That kind of brought me to unconditional positive regard, right?
Yeah.
Treating children and their families, regardless of those demand characteristics, with positive regard, with warmth, with compassion.
Yeah. But I think we have to make it really explicit for ourselves. It's like any kind of bias, right? There's implicit bias always in there. And if we aren't being sort of jostled into making it explicit, it's easy to keep going as you always have and not understand that this child whose nose is always running is having a very different experience with me than this child who is delightful in every way and never challenges me. And how then the ways they experience their day with me could be very, very different.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because who's gonna make explicit that you kind of cringe when snot nose comes over for a hug versus
the
other kid, right? You need to be extremely aware of that. And
on the
probably
flip
not forgetting
side,
the snot nose.
the child who's always beautiful and delightful and hugs me all the time and always wants to be with me.
Right.
Also, there's a challenge to our daily experience together. If there's never that opportunity to experience, I'm going to say shame and doubt because we've talked about that already. But again, I'm not saying I need to plan out times to make them feel ashamed. I don't need a shame box on my lesson plan to make sure that they've all had a healthy amount of shame and doubt that day. But I just think that's another depth, adds another layer of depth to the conversation we're having, and that Lilian was writing about.
Right. Yeah, there's right, the easy child still needs feedback and support and patience and confirmation that they're not creating that image, right?
Yeah. So this is I think connected to things we've talked about already, but on page 34, she has a section about esteem for children, and she writes, esteem is conveyed to them when significant adults and peers treat them respectfully, consult their views and preferences, even when we don't accede to them, and provide
Mhm.
opportunities for real decisions and choices about events and things that matter to them. That I think also needs to be highlighted. And
Mhm.
we've talked about already that we don't need to shield them from negative experiences or um, coddle them and make sure that they never have any kind of a challenge. um, so here that even if we don't accede to their views and preferences, we can consult it, and that's part of what we can do to draw that line between self-esteem development and a preoccupation with self or narcissism.
Right, absolutely. And being able to, oh, yeah, there was your line earlier about feelings cannot be learned from direct instruction too.
Yeah, yeah,
But yes, this the idea of that self-efficacy, self-advocacy, right? That the
yeah,
and the child's worth, right?
yeah. So worth is an interesting word to bring into the conversation. Um, because I think I probably also use self-worth in place of self-esteem
Mhm.
sometimes. Um, but it's pretty value laden, right? To talk
Yeah,
about whether a child is worth something and what they're worth
right.
in that sense. So where do you,
Mhm.
I don't know, where do you see that? How do you see that
I mean, I feel like
coming into the
while I was
conversation?
saying it, I think it was connected to their that's just a truism. I was going to say connected to their value as human,
Uh-huh.
but their existence, right? They are worthwhile. Their ideas are worthwhile.
Mhm.
Their work is worthwhile
Right.
because they are here,
Uh-huh.
right?
Right.
Period.
Right. So so we can, as I'm thinking about it, we can sort of create again that daily experience with
Mhm.
an attachment figure that she says leads to that healthier self-esteem as opposed to narcissism. Um, we send them messages about their worth by whether we act like it's worthwhile to pay attention to them as individuals or whether we act like it's not worthwhile to acknowledge them as individuals. So I mean, I think about things like the child who just is constantly, or the like, even the child whose full name is always used because we're always bugged with them, and then all the other
Mhm.
children use their full name. Like that might seem like really minor, but it's an experience in a cumulative
Yeah,
process that,
right,
if repeated, can have that sort of damaging effect on whether they view themselves as worthy of kindness and acceptance and emotional safety and relational
right,
safety.
right. And because we are not the only factor in the early childhood environment, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
being aware that, just like you said, right, if we're always using the full name and then the kids start always using the full name, being aware of the substantial effect, the additive
Yeah.
effect,
Yeah.
or multiplicative effect, really, of how, children reference us as they're seeing how we treat each individual and the whole
Mhm.
group. And, I think
Yeah.
we've all heard echoes in the classroom of our own words and tone, and sometimes been
Yeah.
like, "Oh, hey, they got it," and sometimes been like, "Ooh, do I? Is that actually my tone when I say that?"
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There was it in this chapter, or did I look at another chapter where she talked about independence versus interdependence in the context of this? Does that sound familiar? Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. Page 30. The
Okay.
distinctions between the Western independent and the
Yes.
non-Western interdependent construal of the self indicate that the sources of self-esteem are also distinctive. So like, I think this falls into the autonomy versus shame and doubt conversation too. We misunderstand autonomy as being able to do everything for themselves rather
Yes.
than feeling like they can have some control over what happens to them. Does that make sense?
Right. Right. Autonomy being I can put on my shoes versus I can work within my community.
Yeah. Or I can have influence
Mhm.
or I can advocate for myself when I need to, whatever that might be.
Right.
But I always think about when I'm thinking about independence versus interdependence, something Tiffany said in an episode a long time ago, where we were talking about, I think it was one of the early episodes we were doing with Carol about the caring, the Illuminating Care book. And we were talking about like when you have 20 kids who all need to get their coats on to go outside, then we talk about valuing independence, but it's not really about the child being independent, right? It's about us not having to help 20 children with their zippers, or the child who can zip his own coat but wants your help. And we were talking about that, and Tiffany said, but what if he just wants your face? What if he just wants your interaction? What if he just wants you down there? Because we have the interdependence and the idea of community and depending on each other can also impact our view of
Mhm.
ourselves in a positive way. With
Right.
independent, it's really, well, you do it or you don't. And
Right.
the only side of that we value is the do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's perfect. I think there's a risk when we look at these kind of cultural comparisons of exoticizing or
Right.
minimizing, right? But
Yeah.
I do think that's, there's no good or bad independence, interdependence until you get to the extremes, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
but I do think that's such an important consideration of being part of the group, wanting that
Right.
extra 10 seconds of your face.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I thought I had something and it's gone. Now it's my turn to not have words. So what else? You're the one who said you had all kinds of brilliant ideas at 4 a.m. What
Well, then
else do
I
we need to
said
get
I
to?
fell asleep after that, so I don't know what's actually going
Okay.
to come out of my mouth.
Okay. Well, you're safe here.
No, I think the last thing was just, you know, when when is this relevant in our direct work with young children?
Okay.
Right. So if we're not in a program that has these posters and these explicit self-esteem lessons and these requirements to,
Mhm.
read XYZ book, talk about why each child is special, when is it when does it benefit the children's mental health, well-being, lifelong well-being to focus on this, right? When
Um,
and who needs it the most, who and how are we giving it to them?
mhm.
Because everybody needs it, right? Everybody needs this self-efficacy, this ability to interact within a group.
Yeah.
And also I think that it comes up when we have concerns about a specific child or a couple children or, some
Yeah.
subset of the group.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard to I think facilitating that development with individual children within a group
Yeah.
can be difficult, but I think it's also a worthwhile goal.
Yeah. I think the current climate around social and emotional learning right now, where some people are taking super offense at the idea that any of our schools or early childhood settings would include that as teaching.
Right.
Um, I think the opportunity there is for us to kind of ground ourselves in understanding we can't direct instruction children into healthy kind of self identity development or self-worth or community. or
Right.
connection. It all comes from our interactions and the adult's
Mhm.
explicit awareness of how our interactions can impact that. So, some children might definitely have a different need,
Mhm.
or be sort of louder about not having. I'm trying to think how to say this in not a deficit way, but anyway, there will always be
Mhm.
people with children with greater needs or more apparent needs. But if we are
Mhm.
just every day thinking about how am I with children? What am I like? How
Mhm.
do I talk to them? Which children make me cringe and how do I need to work on that? Um, I think that's a good first step to get us to those kinds of daily experiences that accumulate into more of what we want to see or hope children have, um,
Mhm.
than if we're looking at a set of early childhood standards about social emotional development and planning activities to prove that we're working on it, and then
Right.
getting the pushback from the people who don't think we should be doing it at all.
Right.
Looking at you, Moms for Liberty.
I wonder though, the direct instruction, you can't direct instruct self-esteem, right? You can't direct instruct a feeling, but you can offer assistance in uh, self-advocacy.
Sure. So maybe it's more accurate to say you can't do it with direct instruction alone,
Okay. Yeah.
or your
Right. You can't
direct
just sit everybody
instruction
down.
should be very intentional, uh,
Mhm.
and not just, well, this is all about me week, so we're going to read books about loving ourselves. But then next week is a new theme, so we never revisit it with direct instruction.
Right. Right. Finding
Or,
those opportunities to say, Charlie, it looks like you're pretty upset with the game everybody else chose to play. Is there
right.
something you want to tell them that you'd like to play?
Yeah. So then again, I'm shifting my language to whole group direct instruction.
Mhm.
Maybe isn't as meaningful as that in the moment one-on-one direct instruction
Right.
that you just were kind of giving an example of.
Mhm.
I'm just not a fan of whole group direct instruction in just about any context other than reading stories together.
Right.
Okay, I don't have anything else.
That's it. I feel like it's such an excellent essay, and also a lot of it, I think we've covered quite a bit of it. I think the
Yeah.
only other thing that we didn't touch on was the um, enchantment and amusement rather than
Yeah.
genuine feelings. I think
Yeah.
that might
Do
be
you
the
want to
last
take a
piece,
couple minutes for that?
perhaps.
I got to get back to it. Um,
It's towards the very end. I think it starts on page
Yeah,
41.
yeah, I'm trying to find a good. So the section is called uses and misuses of enchantment, and one of the first thing I have highlighted is it's related to a general tendency to sweeten and amuse children into feeling good and having fun rather than being involved, absorbed, and challenged.
Right, and the surface level, and I think we see it throughout, both curriculum and just day-to-day experiences, right?
Mhm.
The surface level learning, the surface level experiences, the
Yeah,
entertainment rather than education.
right. Um, it's playing teacher, right, versus
Hmm.
really understanding development. One of the other episodes we're doing with Lilian Katz is her article about the distinction between intellectual and academic goals. And she uses the word intellectual a lot in here, and I kept making note of not academic, intellectual. It just means kind of understanding children's cognitive development at the time that they're with you, how it's connected to sort of authentic self-esteem, and
Right,
and honoring that element of their humanity rather than just amusing or entertaining or assuming that if we're all singing and the children look like they're having fun, then I've done what I need to do.
Right. And the cutification, right? We
Yeah.
don't let children experience or talk about or sometimes even play out, you know, like Shucks got the poster of the bear and the rabbit and some other animal, sorry, a rabbit, a mouse, and a bear sitting around a table, right? But we don't let the kids be the bear and start growling at people, even when, that's the whole
Yeah.
lived experience, right?
Yeah.
We
But I get to be a bear and
hide.
growl at the child who's trying to growl like a bear.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
We dampen their experiences, and we're doing them such a disservice by sheltering them, I
Yeah.
guess,
Yeah.
right?
Even
From,
intellectually. Yeah.
yeah. And I also thought her chapter, or sorry, her paragraph about we introduce children to stranger danger, instruct them in ways to resist physical and sexual abuse, teach them, if not hound them, about the elements of good nutrition, warn them of dangerous drugs, and in some classrooms, AIDS, long before they can understand and cope with such serious matters. And I thought that was interesting because the book came out in 95, which was the year that I was in kindergarten. And I have a handful of memories of kindergarten. One of them was sitting on the carpet at circle time when a puppeteer came in with a little squirrel to tell us about not going to parties to drink beer and how wildly irrelevant that felt to me at the time. And,
That's funny.
would for quite some time.
Yeah. I was in kindergarten in 1975, Liz. I probably was going to parties. No, not really.
And then it would have been relevant to you and therefore developmentally appropriate for your classroom.
I have no memories of kindergarten.
But this idea of, cutifying these messages that we
Yeah.
find very important for young children,
Yeah.
versus, not letting them exhibit and experience and play with anger and pain, really, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, or even thinking about what's really relevant to a child at this age, or to the individual child that you know because of your relationship and your daily experience with them. We can make decisions about, is this relevant to them right now? Is this going to be intellectually sort of fitting, or is it just something I have on my list of standards or my prescribed curriculum?
Right. And when it is on that list of standards, and, how can we tweak it to be appropriate? How can we tweak it so we're meeting that goal? How we're saying the wolves, right? Like, look, I'm doing this thing by allowing them the freedom to choose their activities, and by supporting their existence within small groups and the larger group and independent exploration.
Yeah. I think this is a whole other episode, but I don't want to start a whole long thing because we're about at an hour. But what this has me thinking about now is conversations about rigor and high expectations. There's a difference between offering something that's truly intellectually engaging and just saying, I'm going to do things that are really hard because that's my high expectation of them, is that everyone's going to get to this really hard thing instead of knowing your individual. And that can also have a cumulative effect on how they see themselves, experience themselves being valued or not valued, worthy or not worthy.
And assuming that, again, just looking past the individual, assuming the hard thing is the hard thing for everybody.
Yeah.
Right? The child who's struggling socially but is excelling at math might have that brief moment of, or, that brief time in this class of, I'm doing great. I'm like at the top. I've always got this under control. And then they get out to the playground and it's a very different story because they haven't had the opportunity to develop those relationship skills with peers.
Yeah. 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 It all feeds into it. All right. Good job, Lilian Katz. Still talking about this 1993 article because it's still relevant. Okay, well, let's wrap this up then. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you. This is fun.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Come back again for another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.